There is a curious temptation that rises when we are tired, wounded, or simply uncertain, the temptation to go back to what broke us, back to what we escaped. It whispers like a familiar lullaby. It wasn't so bad. At least you knew how it worked. At least it was predictable. But I tell you, never go back. Not to the relationship that fractured your spirit, not to the town that buried your dreams, not to the job that imprisoned your potential. You owe it to yourself to remember why you left. The nights you cried alone while they slept beside you unaware, the way your soul dimmed gradually in the small town that never asked you who you really were, the routine in that old job, how it drained your spark, every ticking second like a slow leak of purpose. That was real. You left for a reason, and that reason still stands, even if your memory softens the edges. Nostalgia is a thief dressed in velvet. It caresses your wounds, makes you think they never hurt. But wounds unhealed only fester in the dark. Don't return to what cut you. Don't sit again at tables where you were once the feast. You are not obliged to explain your growth to those who never nurtured it. People don't change because you wish they would. Places don't evolve just because you did. You are no longer the version of you that tolerated chaos and called it love, that accepted stagnation and named it stability. Growth is a lonely journey, yes, but it is the price of becoming someone you can finally respect. Returning to old relationships, it's like revisiting a battlefield where you were left for dead. You might find familiar faces, yes, but what of the scars? The unsaid apologies, the quiet resentment still tucked under their smile. You will walk into that house and find the furniture rearranged, but the foundation still cracked. And the town, that old place where they said, "Who do you think you are?" Every time you tried to be more than what they understood, that place never asked you to bloom. It asked you to conform. Don't let guilt drag you back to a cage just because you once called it home. The truth is, you outgrew it. And some places are only meant for your origin, not your evolution. Your old Jabbar, the devil you knew, it gave you a paycheck but stole your joy. It praised your loyalty while eroding your creativity. Don't confuse comfort with peace. That desk may still be there, your name still on the system, but if you sit there now, you will suffocate, because your soul has tasted a higher calling. There is no shame in starting over. There is no weakness in building a new life from ashes. You are not created to relive the same pain over and over again just because it's familiar. Your destiny lies forward, not behind, and to walk backward into the fire you already escaped is a betrayal of your own bravery. If you must look back, let it only be to remind yourself of how far you've come. Let it fuel your resolve, not your retreat. The person you are becoming has no business revisiting the graveyards of who you used to be. Leave the tombstones where they are, let the dead stay buried. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to be remembered as the reason you learned to swim. You survived once, you can do it again. But don't insult your growth by returning to what you once prayed to escape. Survival without growth is simply existing, and you weren't born just to exist. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning. Closure doesn't require presence. Sometimes healing is in the distance, in knowing you could go back, but you choose not to. That is real power. That is real maturity. When your peace costs your past, pay the price. You are not selfish for choosing your future. You are not cruel for walking away a second time, this time permanently. You are wise. You are learning that not everyone or everything is meant to continue the journey with you. That doesn't make them bad. It just means you are going somewhere they cannot follow. You don't need to make an announcement. Just keep walking. Let your silence speak volumes. Let your progress echo where your words never reached. If they wonder where you went, they'll see it in the way you shine, in the way you no longer bend, in the way you've finally chosen yourself. So never go back, not to the relationship that gaslit your love, not to the town that shamed your ambition, not to the job that quieted your voice. If you must return to anything, let it be your strength, let it be your courage, let it be the promise you made to yourself the day you left. Never again. There comes a moment in every person's life when the past taps them on the shoulder. It's never loud, it doesn't need to be. It arrives in the form of a familiar scent, an old photograph, or a voice that once held your attention in a way that nearly paralyzed your intuition. And it says, "Do you remember?" But memory can be deceiving. Memory dresses pain in velvet and puts perfume on regret. The mind is a magician, conjuring the best parts of the worst places. It brings forth warmth without the cold, smiles without the silence, moments without the long nights that preceded them. The past, when idealized, becomes a seductive illusion, one we crave when the future feels uncertain or the present feels harsh. But illusions are not shelters, they are shadows. Your past may have housed you once, but it was never meant to be your home forever. It served a purpose. It shaped you, carved the edges of your identity, and taught you what not to accept again. But once the lesson is learned, you don't keep retaking the exam. You move forward, not because you despise where you came from, but because you finally understand it was only a starting point. Homes are supposed to nurture, to heal, to allow rest. But so many of us treat our past like it's sacred land, as if it must be returned to for validation. Yet when you walk back into it, you find the walls smaller than you remembered, the ceilings lower, the light colder. You've outgrown it, but nostalgia keeps lying to you. There are towns that will always call your name, people who will always believe they knew you best, jobs that pretend they were your safety net when they were actually your cage. They speak in a chorus, singing lullabies of familiarity, but what's familiar isn't always what's right. Sometimes it's merely what you've survived. You see, survival does not mean peace. Survival can happen in chaos, in toxicity, in dysfunction. And yet, the human spirit clings to survival as if it is glory, but glory is growth. Peace is purpose. The past, no matter how comfortable, is often the antithesis of both. Going back is not bravery, it's bargaining with ghosts. We tell ourselves stories about who we used to be. We minimize the cracks and emphasize the warmth. We say, it wasn't so bad. But the truth is it was. If it wasn't, you wouldn't have left. You wouldn't have fought tooth and nail to step beyond that door and search for air where you could finally breathe. People return to the past not because they're weak, but because healing is hard. The unknown is harder. We imagine our former lives were simpler, when in reality they were simply known quantities. The past is measurable, it has definition, but the future, that is terrifying in its openness. So we seek the prison we once knew. But your soul didn't come here to be a relic. You weren't born to be a permanent resident of old decisions. Life is motion. It is not meant to be a museum tour of yesterday's choices. Your heart, if you listen closely, does not beat to old rhythms. It creates new ones every day, and they are trying to lead you somewhere unfamiliar but worthy. You can honor your past without dragging it into your future. You can acknowledge what shaped you without allowing it to shape what's next. There is no betrayal in choosing growth, no betrayal in building new homes from scratch. The betrayal lies in denying your expansion for the comfort of repetition. The past, though persuasive, is not your friend. It is your witness. It saw your pain and your triumph. It recorded it, but it does not decide what comes next. That decision is yours, and if you base it on memory alone, you risk repeating stories you were born to rewrite. Some people revisit the past in pursuit of closure, but closure is rarely found in old places. It's found in the quiet certainty of choosing different, in walking past the same roads and not turning, in facing the same crossroads and picking the path that once terrified you. That's where closure hides, on the other side of not going back. You don't need to relive the wound to prove you've healed. You don't need to re-enter the storm to show you can stand. The exit was enough. The survival was sufficient. Now comes the creation, the part where you build what your past could never offer. There is no invitation waiting in the past, only echoes, only a version of you that no longer exists. You are not required to answer the call of an old life simply because it knows your name. Your identity is not a chain, It is a seed designed to transform with every season, and if the past was winter, perhaps now you are meant for spring. You were never meant to live forever in the chapters that once almost broke you, even if you loved parts of them, even if some days still smell like them. Your story is still being written. The home you're looking for is not behind you. It's being built with every brave step you take forward. There is something eerily poetic about broken relationships. They leave behind fragments of conversations, scattered memories, and the lingering ghost of touch. We find ourselves haunted not always by what happened, but by what almost did, by the potential that once fluttered quietly between two people who, despite their best efforts, could never find a common rhythm. And still, when loneliness visits, the idea of returning often feels easier than the uncertainty of staying away. But a relationship that fractured your spirit is not a mystery to be solved. It is not an unfinished novel craving an ending. It was complete in its own tragic way. The ending may not have been cinematic, and the silence may have followed a storm instead of a resolution. But it ended, and that was its answer. It does not require a sequel to validate the pain it already wrote into your memory. You see, we confuse familiarity for love far too often. We forget that just because someone knew how to reach us doesn't mean they ever truly saw us. We mistake shared history for compatibility, when in truth many people walk together for years and remain strangers. It is the illusion of intimacy, the rehearsed dance of knowing someone's patterns without ever understanding their heart. A relationship that broke you didn't do so by accident. It chipped away at you slowly. It knew your tenderness and didn't protect it. It saw your need for safety and played hide and seek with your peace, and you naive, hopeful, endlessly giving. You stayed, you explained, you hoped some more. Until eventually you had to choose between loving them and saving yourself. The ones who fracture us rarely apologize in the language we need. They offer a version of remorse tailored for their comfort, not our healing. A text message, a midnight call, a vague apology about how things turned out. And in your vulnerable state, that might feel like redemption. But don't be fooled. That isn't growth. That's nostalgia disguised as progress. If you walk back into that relationship, understand what you're returning to. Not just the laughter, the private jokes, the shared bed sheets, but also the long silences, the unspoken resentment, the constant negotiation of your self-worth. You are not stepping into a clean slate. You are returning to a battlefield where the weapons are merely hidden, not gone. There's a part of you that believes love must be hard, that the best relationships come after suffering, after tests of endurance. But love does not have to crucify you to be real. Love is not meant to be earned through pain. It is supposed to be gentle, protective, affirming. If someone needed to hurt you just to keep you close, that was never love. That was survival dressed up as passion. People often say, but they've changed. And maybe they have, or maybe they've changed just enough to lure you back into a place where they still have the upper hand. True change is not a declaration. It's not words. It's not flowers sent on a random Tuesday. It's consistency. It's humility. It's owning the damage caused, not just once, but again and again, until the echoes fade. Few ever get that far. You owe yourself a new chapter, not co-authored by those who once erased parts of you. You owe it to your spirit to believe that love can be soft and kind without first dragging you through the fire. The one who broke you taught you what to never accept again. That was their role in your life. Not a partner, not a soulmate. Just a harsh lesson written in a language only your heart could translate. Returning is tempting. The silence in your bed grows louder. The world outside feels overwhelming. And there they are reaching out, offering comfort through the same hands that once let you fall. But remember this, no one who truly loves you will ever make you beg for peace. No one who deserves you will treat your boundaries as negotiation points. You did not escape that relationship just to prove a point. You left because your soul whispered that staying would mean slowly disappearing. And now, when you entertain the idea of returning, ask yourself, which part of me wants this, the healed part or the wounded one? Because if it's the latter, you're not choosing love, you're choosing familiarity over freedom. The past has a way of rewriting itself in softer ink. It erases the moments you cried yourself to sleep and amplifies the memories that made you feel alive. But if you place your hand back on a hot stove simply because it once warmed you, you'll be burned again. The damage doesn't change just because you miss the heat. You are not weak for missing someone who hurt you. That's the human condition. We romanticize the ones who failed us, hoping that in doing so, we'll somehow reclaim our worth. But your worth is not buried in their approval. It never was. You don't need to go back to prove you're lovable. You already are fully, deeply, irrevocably. Let the relationship that broke you remain where it belongs, in the archive of your becoming. Not as a place you revisit for validation, but as a monument to your evolution. You walked away once, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself. And that decision deserves to be honored, not undone. There is a peculiar comfort in the known, even if the known is painful. The human mind is oddly loyal to repetition, drawn to patterns like moths to a flickering light. It doesn't always seek joy or meaning. Sometimes it simply seeks the familiar, because in that familiarity there is predictability, and in predictability a mirage of control. But do not confuse the feeling of recognition with the presence of peace. Safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of stability, and stability, real stability, does not feel like walking on eggshells, bracing for the next outburst, or calculating your words to avoid conflict. That is not peace, that is survival under a quiet tyranny, the kind of tyranny that smiles while it bleeds you, slowly, quietly, day after day. A town can feel like home, even when it suffocates you. It may be where your roots began to grow, but roots can also bind you to a place that no longer nourishes you. The streets you know, like the back of your hand, can lead you into the same traps over and over. And the faces you once trusted can become ghosts in daylight. Familiar, yes, but no longer kind. And what of the job you left behind? The one that stole your sleep, but paid your rent. The one that called itself opportunity while taking bites from your soul. We return to these places not because they are better, but because we are frightened. Frightened of the unknown, of failure, of regret. But fear is a poor architect for your future. It builds small rooms with no windows. Do not trust something simply because you recognize it. A clenched fist feels like home to someone who grew up with violence. A cold silence can seem like normality to those who have never tasted warmth. You must ask yourself not whether a place or a person feels familiar, but whether it feels free. There is a vast difference. Familiarity lulls you into a rhythm. It makes you forget you ever had the right to want more. The old relationship, the old town, the old job, they come with stories you already know. You can recite their patterns in your sleep, but the question is not whether you know them. The question is whether they ever truly knew you. You may tell yourself that going back is about closure, that maybe this time things will be different, but returning to what hurt you rarely brings closure. It only reopens the wound, and this time you bleed not just from the injury, but from the betrayal of your own progress. You turned your back once. You left for a reason. That reason still stands, even if your knees now tremble. Peace is not passive. It is not silence between arguments. It is not the absence of movement. Peace is presence. It is fullness. It is the space to breathe without shrinking. The people and places that ask you to become smaller for the sake of harmony are not peaceful. They are prisons in disguise. We romanticize the past because we survived it. We tell ourselves it wasn't that bad, not because it was good, but because we learned how to live with the bad. We adapted, we adjusted, but adaptation is not the same as thriving. A fish can survive in shallow waters, but it was made for the ocean. Stop mistaking what you endured for what you deserved. Just because you learned to navigate dysfunction doesn't mean it's your natural habitat. You were not born to tolerate, you were born to transform, and transformation requires new ground, unfamiliar paths, fresh air. You cannot grow in soil that poisoned you. Old places can whisper your name with sweet voices, but their embrace is tight and their walls are closing in. The same routine, the same conversations, the same limitations wrapped in new promises. You may go back thinking you're stronger now, and maybe you are. But strength is not measured by how long you can stay in the fire, it's measured by how boldly you walk away from it. There are people who will tell you that returning shows maturity, that forgiveness means going back. But forgiveness is not a round-trip ticket. It is a release, a letting go. You can forgive without returning. You can love without allowing yourself to be diminished again. You can honor your past without surrendering your future to it. The most dangerous thing about familiarity is that it doesn't ask for change. It welcomes you as you were, not as you've become. And if you're not careful, it will slowly, subtly convince you to forget the evolution you fought so hard for. It will seduce you into trading your growth for comfort. That is the greatest betrayal, not by them, but by yourself. You are not obligated to return to places where you once belonged. Belonging is not permanent. It shifts. It evolves as you do. Sometimes the most powerful act of self-love is to walk forward into the unknown rather than crawl back into the known pain. The known is a cage without bars, and the key has always been in your pocket. Let the familiar be a memory, not a destination. Let it remain where it belongs, in your past, not in your present, because safety, real safety, waits ahead. It speaks a quieter language, and you may not recognize its face at first. But it will not ask you to shrink. It will not ask you to return to who you once were just to feel whole again. There's a moment, often subtle, often slow, when forward motion becomes backward longing. When the challenges of progress make the past seem safer than it ever truly was, that's the first whisper, the first quiet invitation to return, not because it's right, but because it's known, and we're taught, tragically, to seek shelter in what we know, even when what we know once broke us. It happens in steps. You start to forget the weight you used to carry, not because it wasn't heavy, but because healing has a strange way of softening memory. Like fog rolling in over jagged cliffs, the sharp edges of the past begin to blur. You remember the laughter, but not the silence. You recall the comfort, but not the cost. And so the illusion builds. Maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe you left too soon, but you didn't leave because you were weak. You left because you finally had the courage to stop accepting pain as a part of your identity. Going back to that relationship, that town, that job, it isn't romantic, it isn't noble, it's a form of slow erosion. The kind that starts in the spirit, long before it ever touches your skin. It's tempting to believe that going back might fix what was broken. That somehow, by re-entering the old environment, you can rewrite history. But you can't, and you shouldn't. You are not the person who left, and the place you left has not been waiting to evolve with you. It has continued on in its own echo chamber, repeating its own lessons to those who never left. Stagnation wears many disguises. One of its favorites is nostalgia. It dresses itself in sentiment, in shared memories, in the fragrance of an old song, or the echo of a familiar hallway. But you must understand that nostalgia is not a compass. It's a mirror. It reflects, it seduces, but it does not lead. And if you mistake it for guidance, you'll find yourself circling the same ruins you once escaped. The job you left behind, it's still there, with the same ceilings you once hit your head on, with the same voices that questioned your worth, with the same routines that drained your light. And yet, in your weariness, in your search for a foothold, it can seem like a step forward. It isn't. It's a return to the cage, one you once unlocked with blood, sweat, and tears. Going back is how the soul gets stuck in an old version of itself. You wear clothes that no longer fit, recite scripts that no longer match your voice. You begin to shrink to fit rooms you once outgrew. And soon, you don't recognize yourself in the mirror. Not because you've changed, but because you've chosen to forget that you had. The people who once kept you small will welcome your return, not out of love, but out of comfort. You returning validates their stagnation, your progress challenged their illusions, and your absence was a quiet rebellion against everything they convinced themselves was enough. Your return becomes their vindication. Don't hand them that gift. A town isn't just a collection of buildings. It's a memory machine. It remembers who you used to be. It mirrors it back to you through old streets and whispered judgments. You'll walk past places that hold your past like a trap. The version of you that once doubted, once pleaded, once stayed too long, that version waits there, and if you're not careful, it will reach out with open arms and call itself home. We think going back will give us peace, but peace isn't found in familiar pain. Peace is the reward for those who dare to build something new, and building is not easy. It is not quick. It comes with splinters and delays, but going back, that's a demolition. A wrecking of all you've built in your name, a quiet betrayal of the work you've done to stand. You must ask yourself, do you miss the place, or do you miss the version of yourself that once didn't know better? Because the moment you outgrow something, its return isn't healing, it's regression, and life, real life, doesn't move in reverse. It doesn't honor your longing, it honors your direction. Keep moving. The ache to return is not weakness, it's memory, and memory is not always your ally. Sometimes it plays tricks. It's out the truth. It leaves in only the longing. But if you listen closely, beneath the nostalgia, there is a whisper louder than any welcome from the past. It says, you survived, don't go back to what nearly destroyed you. Old jobs, old towns, old lovers, they often want you back, but rarely because they've changed. They want your presence, not your growth. They crave your familiarity, not your truth. Going back is often a pact of silence. You return not as who you've become, but as who you once were. And to stay, you must pretend that who you are now is too much. That is too high a price. Staying away is not cruelty, it's clarity. You are not obligated to revisit your own crucifixions. You are not here to prove you can endure them again. You are here to move beyond them. And if you must be loyal to anything, let it be the version of you that finally had the courage to leave. There's a kind of silence that lives in certain rooms. It lingers long after the voices fade, after the doors close. Not a peaceful silence, but one that holds tension in its walls. That's the silence of places where you were hurt, where your spirit was questioned, where your value was negotiated. When people say healing is possible, they rarely mention how space plays its part. They speak of time, of forgiveness, but rarely of environment. You can't plant a new life in old soil that's poisoned with memory. The ground where you were made to feel small doesn't suddenly become fertile just because you've grown. That soil remembers. It holds the echoes of every tear you swallowed, and you know this, not just intellectually, but in your body. You walk back into that space, and your shoulders remember to tense. Your breath learns to hide again. We like to believe we are strong enough to return, to reclaim, to transform, but the truth is, transformation often demands departure, not because we're weak, but because healing requires new air. You cannot relearn your worth in the same room where you were trained to question it. You cannot expand in spaces that reward your shrinking. They told you to stay, that leaving was running, that healing could happen if only you had the right mindset. But they didn't tell you how hard it is to become new in places that insist on seeing you as you were. You can change your clothes, your speech, your habits, but those walls, those streets, those faces, they remember. And they remind. Sometimes people want you to heal right beside them, so they never have to face the damage they caused. They call it moving on. They call it starting fresh, but really it's an invitation to perform recovery, to act well for their comfort. They want you to decorate your scars, not show them. They want you to whisper your pain, not name it. Healing demands more than time. It demands distance. You must separate yourself not only from the person who hurt you, but from the environment that normalized the hurt. The chair you sat in while you waited for change that never came, the hallway where you walked past your own boundaries, the job that praised your obedience but punished your truth. When you stay in the same environment, the wound doesn't close, it adapts. You learn to walk with it, work with it, smile through it, but healing, real healing, that's when you stop adjusting, that's when you say no more, that's when you stop managing the damage and begin building something that was never broken to begin with. The familiar will always beg you to return, not out of love, but out of need. You were part of its pattern. You made the dysfunction feel normal. Your absence forces it to reckon with itself, and often it would rather pull you back than face what your leaving revealed. Don't confuse that call for reconciliation. Sometimes it's desperation in disguise. True healing is inconvenient. It asks you to start again, to move to new towns where no one knows your history, to take jobs that don't echo the voices that once silenced you, to choose relationships that feel foreign at first because they are not built on rescue or repair, but on equality and peace. It is unfamiliar, but it is necessary. We speak of courage as boldness, as action, but healing is a quiet, relentless form of courage. It's in saying no to invitations cloaked in nostalgia. It's in walking away when the only thing holding you is memory. It's in choosing the unknown over the comfortable ache you've learned to endure. There's a difference between remembering and returning. You can honor where you've come from without crawling back into it. You can tell your story without reopening your wounds. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing which memories you want to carry forward and which ones you finally set down. You cannot ask your soul to stretch in a space that demanded your containment. Every time you go back, even for a visit, even just to see, something shrinks. Not because you are weak, but because you are still human, and the body remembers, the heart remembers, the nervous system remembers, and they all speak louder than your will. Your growth threatens those who have not changed. Your healing exposes what they still deny, so they will tell you that you're being dramatic, that the past is the past, that forgiveness means return, but that's not forgiveness, that's forgetfulness. And forgetting is not the same as healing. You must remember, but you must also rise. The truth is, healing cannot coexist with appeasement. You cannot soothe others while tending to your own wounds. You cannot soften your edges so others feel comfortable in the presence of your change. Healing is not a performance. It is not neat. It is not always welcomed, but it is holy, and it demands a sacred space, one untouched by the hands that once broke you. There is a peculiar kind of strength that emerges when you stop running in circles, when you no longer try to fix what broke you, when you finally see that some doors do not need to be reopened, not even gently. We are taught to be loyal to familiarity, to sentiment, to stories that once made sense. But healing, real healing, isn't sentimental. It's radical, it's sobering, and it begins the moment you stop looking for peace in places that never knew how to hold it. You don't owe anyone your return, not the person who once begged you to stay, not the town that watched you crumble, not the job that applauded your silence while ignoring your soul. You owe them nothing, not your presence, not your explanation, not your backwards glance. What you do owe is to yourself, to your future, to the quiet part of you that dared to believe there was something more. You are not leaving bitterness behind. You are leaving illusions, the illusion that they will change, the illusion that this time will be different, the illusion that you can somehow rewrite a chapter already printed in ink. Let them call you cold, let them call you distant, but do not let them call you home if home means pain dressed as comfort. Closure is not found in conversations with people who refuse to understand. It's found in the mirror, in your own resolve, in the steady breath that says, I survived. You don't need them to apologize. You don't need to walk those streets one more time. You don't need to sit at old desks hoping someone finally sees your worth. That's not healing, that's hoping, and hoping in the wrong place is how you stay stuck. Growth asks you to disappoint the expectations that were never fair to begin with, to say no more when everything in you has been conditioned to say just once more. This is how the past holds us, not in chains, but in rituals. In the tiny decisions to stay connected just in case, but just in case becomes just another year, and then another. Do not confuse endurance with healing. Endurance taught you to survive what was killing you. Healing teaches you to live beyond it. The pain you normalized is not your legacy. The ache you carried like an identity was only meant to be temporary. It is not disloyalty to leave it behind. It is grace. It is truth. It is permission. You are not born to orbit the same lessons until they exhaust your spirit. You are not a museum for other people's mistakes. You are a breathing, changing, becoming soul. And becoming anything worth becoming demands departure from old names, old labels, old limitations. Even if it leaves you lonely, especially if it leaves you lonely, that loneliness will become your sanctuary, your classroom, your chrysalis. People will misunderstand your silence. They will misread your absence. They will write stories about your leaving that paint them innocent and you cruel. Let them. Your job is not to convince them of your pain. Your job is to walk into a life that no longer depends on their permission. That is your healing. That is your triumph. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to live in places where memory has built a prison. It means loving yourself enough to create new spaces, new conversations, new futures. You are not what they did. You are what you do now with what they did. Your healing is the final word, not their apology. We speak so often of returning, as though redemption lies there, but your redemption is not behind you. It is not in the ex who finally changed, not in the town that now calls your name, not in the company offering you what they once withheld. Redemption is in the life you build beyond it, the one where your joy doesn't need to be earned by suffering. You are not obligated to resurrect the version of yourself that others were comfortable with. You are allowed to change, to distance, to disappear entirely from stories that require you to be smaller to be loved. Some people will never understand your journey because they were only meant to be a chapter, not the whole book. The hardest part is grieving what might have been, that quiet echo of if only. But life isn't built on if only. Life is built on what now, and what now is where your power lies. What now is where you stop rehearsing pain and begin authoring peace. There is a future that does not know your name yet, but it is waiting. It is wide, unformed, and filled with people, places, and purposes that will never require you to prove your worth. But you will never reach it by running backwards. You cannot bloom in soil that punished your roots for growing. The truth is, you cannot become new if you're always negotiating with your old life. Something must be left behind. And when you finally choose not to go back, not to the relationship, not to the town, not to the job, you will feel it, the quiet weight lifting, the ground beneath you shifting. That is not fear, that is freedom. And freedom, once you taste it, makes returning impossible.